to start, let's look at the people menu. We'll talk about how to manage people, that is, all the users of your site. So as I said, the people menu is where you administer your users and configure their permissions. Access to viewing and managing your Islandora site is all set up in Drupal's permissions. Drupal manages permissions according to roles. And these here are all roles. The list page here lists all of the registered users on your site, their roles, and a link to edit their account, where you can change their role, delete their account, etc. You can see that a user can have multiple roles if you wanted to. If we look at the roles tab, so roles define different categories of user according to the functions that they need to fulfill on the site. The ones that you see here are the roles that we've defined for you as defaults. You could optionally choose to create more roles on top of them. Each role is granted certain permissions on your site, and those permissions can be customized on your own individual sites. But thing to know is that every person who has a given role has all of those same permissions that are assigned to that role. So don't give somebody a powerful role unless you want them to be able to do everything that someone with that role can do. As I said, you can give somebody more than one role, which will give them the permissions assigned to each of them. So if somebody needs both repository permissions and website configuration permissions, you can give them both the site admin and the repository admin roles. I'll take you through these default roles. So the anonymous user is any random user that comes into your site without logging in. So any person who finds your site with Google search or whatever, they are anonymous users. This group would and should have the weakest permissions. Typically, they're just able to view content and media that hasn't been embargoed. The authenticated user, meanwhile, is anybody who has logged in, regardless of what other roles that they might have. The authenticated user, too, would have pretty basic permissions as they apply to anybody with a login, though they'd have more than an anonymous user should. The editor role is intended to cover users that are allowed to edit or modify existing content, but not to create or delete. The submitter role is intended to cover users that are allowed to submit to repository items that are held for approval before publishing. So if you have self-submission from faculty or students, for example, you would give that role to those people who can create the repository items, put them together, and submit them for your approval before they become part of the repository. The ingester role is intended for users who are authorized to add content to the repository without review. Most of your repository staff would have that role. Then the repository administrator is somebody who is able to perform any functions at all related to repository content, such as adding, editing, deleting, migrating items between collections, assigning media to repository items, changing the media, managing and assigning embargoes, batch editing, etc. This is the most powerful role on the repository side, and it should be granted with caution. There should really be just a small number of people at your organization who have that role. Similarly with the site administrator role, site administrators have the ability to make major modifications to the site structure itself, including changing the theming, placing and moving blocks, editing views, creating new views, changing display modes, making fields visible or not. This is the most dangerous role that an Arca admin can have in terms of the permissions that it grants and the damage that accidental misconfigurations could do to your site. So really, you should probably have just one person or so in this role. And finally, there's the administrator role. The administrator has automatic permission to do anything and everything they want to do in your site. For that reason, because it's a very dangerous role, It is held only by BCLN's Arca staff and support staff from Discovery Garden. It should not be granted to anyone else. If you feel like you don't have the permissions that you need, you can reach out to us and we can review and possibly grant them or talk about what exactly you want to do. So let's take a look at those permissions. Permissions are organized according to the specific module or function that they relate to. So you can see the filters here by module. You can see all these roles with the module as the header and then the specific permission below it. If you need to change the permissions for a given user, then, for example, you want the ingester role to be allowed to delete repository items, you just check that box for that user next to that permission. So if we say delete, yeah, these are all the delete options. You can delete blocks, you can administer block content, all that stuff. You can filter as well. There we go. So filter to repository. These are the permissions relating to repository items. You see that ingesters and submitters are allowed to create new items. Editors can't. Ingesters cannot delete any content at all. Repository administrators can. Ingesters can delete their own content, but submitters cannot. If you want to change that, you just check that box and then save your permissions once you're done. But remember again that the permissions that you grant apply to every single person who has that role. So be careful when assigning these. Some of the permissions that you see here are only available to that grayed out administrator role. I'll clear the filter so you can see everything. There we go. That is the Arca Office team. That is simply for safety reasons. Drupal and Islandora have a lot of complexly interconnected moving parts, and there are many things that can be done by accident that could cripple your site. So we would rather, if your site is going to be accidentally destroyed, that we did it rather than you, because it's easier for us to fix it that way. So we restrict some of the permissions in order to prevent those things from happening. So when setting your permissions, the most important rule is to never give anonymous users anything without careful consideration. The internet is full of hackers and spammers and bots that would all love to find weak permissions for anonymous users on any website, especially a popular one like Arca. So by default, we set your site to only allow local administrators to create new accounts. Anonymous users cannot create their own. And I highly recommend not changing this setting, because once you do, I guarantee that within a few days you'll have several dozen, if not several thousand, bot-created accounts all trying to get permissions on your site. So if we go back to that list page, let's try creating a new user, and you can feel free to play along in the site. So in order to create a new user, it's very simple. You go to the People menu. You can either click Add User here, or on the list page, click the Add User button. Put in their email address. Let's say our manager, Sunny. Give them a unique username. This could be a pseudonym, or it could even be their full name. Spaces are allowed. You can give them a password. You have to give them a password, but you can also allow them to set their own. So you can just put a simple placeholder password in for now. You can give them a role. Consider when doing so what role would be most appropriate to give this new person. They should not receive the administrator role, and according to the permissions you have, you won't even be able to assign it. Remember that administrator is the role that can easily break your website by accident. If they need high-level management access for the site, you would make them a site administrator. If they need to manage all of the repository content, make them a repository administrator. Otherwise, they should have probably a different role. So if they're just working to ingest and edit content, make them an ingester. If they're a student or faculty member who are just submitting their work for review, you make them a submitter. If there's somebody who work for your organization who is editing items, make them an editor. Yep. Then once you've selected a role, You can toggle on the notify user of new account. This means that they will receive an email from your site with a link to log in that will take them to their user page, or they can change their password, and then they don't need to use the one that you've assigned them. You can also set their time zone if you like. We've by default set it to Vancouver because most Arca members are in BC time. You can give them an alias if you like, and then you just create the account. I'm not going to notify Sunny because I'm using a real person, and I don't want her to get spammed with emails. So, successfully created a new account for the user. No email has been sent. If I go back to the list, there she is. If I don't want her in the site anymore, I can edit, and I can cancel her account. I can either disable it, delete it, etc.